USAID got in trouble for is when they were essentially sustaining the world's heroin supply. 95% of the world's heroin supply, came from Afghanistan.
Why were they doing that?
Well, so USAID's one of their close partners is another USAID adjacent entity called the U.S. Institute for Peace. Its office is right next to the State Department in Washington, D.C. It was created by Congress. It gets $56 million a year from taxpayers. And in 2023, the U.S. Institute for Peace wrote a white paper that said that told the Taliban not to shut down the heroin, not to shut down the poppy fields, because it would create a, quote, economic and humanitarian disaster. That basically, this is the State Department. They're fully funded by the U.S. State Department. They are the sort of the policy arm of many of the aspects of USAID. Whereas USAID is $44 billion, they only have $56 million, but they all advance U.S. foreign policy in a cohesive vision for a region, and they're both operating in Afghanistan. So while U.S. Institute for Peace is saying we need to keep the heroin flowing, it was USAID who was doing all the water irrigation of the poppy fields in order that allowed that propagation of the heroin to continue. And that gets into a darker story around the role of narco activity and narco gangs as instruments of statecraft. This was the Mujahideen that were pumped up by Zbigniew Brzezinski and our CIA, and in the 1970s and 80s, and they were being funded by drug money from the Golden Crescent, and it being laundered into Pakistan banks like the CIA bank, BCCI, and everyone can read about the Bank of Credit and Commerce International scandal and that. But it was narco terrorism funding for U.S. backed terrorist paramilitary groups that we were propping up as freedom fighters against the Soviets in Afghanistan. If you remember seeing the old, Osama bin Laden puff piece, freedom warrior on the road to peace with, when he's back in the Mujahideen days. But what I'm saying is you see this play out everywhere. This was a big part of, how right-wing capitalist movements were in Western Hemisphere were propped up against left-wing socialist and Marxist opposition in the 1950s and 60s, and you see this run through everything. Think about what's happened with El Salvador. Why did Bukele say that basically was the first one on X to say that USAID is awful, it's got to go, countries don't want it, look at my case, because USAID was trying to regime change him from there. The Soros groups, they all said that his attempts to clean up the drug trade were humanitarian violations of the rights of drug cartels. Have you seen that the government of Mexico appears to actually be quite happy with the move to abolish USAID? There's a piece in Newsweek about Trump's strange allies in the fight to end USAID, and it's the Mexican government. They don't want it either. Well, what I'm saying is the scope of our dirty deeds done through USAID and State Department grants and through CIA covert activity that is only made possible because they're working with assets whose budget is funded by USAID, or budget is funded by state, or budget is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy or others. A lot of that work is just liaising with assets that are there. They don't have that big a budget. USAID is a 3 times bigger budget than the CIA. And so they depend on working with State Department USAID cultivated assets. And so we're going to have to disentangle this whole spider web in order to form a cohesive foreign policy vision that isn't evil.
And I think that's the point, that isn't evil. Because, in our system, I really think in any system, even a monarchy, the people have to think that in general the government is, doing things they approve of, isn't actively evil, isn't, in business with the drug cartels in Mexico, which our government is, as you know. because if the people of a country don't think their own government has legitimacy, like, it can't last very long.
Right.
It doesn't last, right?
Right. No, absolutely.